Welcome to the Real Bible Rob podcast, and today I'll do something a little different. This is a peaceful and soulful episode. If you're a regular listener of mine, you're used to hearing me challenging some notions, biblical notions, and I'll do a little bit less of that this time. My hope is that you'll be able to hear this, have a cup of tea or coffee and in a quiet place, or while you're walking in the morning, or even if you're driving, that it'll put you in the kind of mood that makes you ready for whatever it presents for you coming up. So that's a little bit of a departure. I will follow up because I'm going to talk a little bit about grief in this episode, and I have a lot to say about how grief is being suppressed. Lament is being suppressed so much today, but I'm going to do that in another episode. I'll keep the ranting into that episode. In this one, I want to do a deep dive on "The Lord is my shepherd," Psalm 23. It is very beautiful, and many of you probably even have it memorized in the King James Version, especially. But even if you don't, it's very familiar, and it's usually read in times of sorrow and grief, and it's appropriate for that, certainly. But it's so much more. It's more than grief affirmation. It's more than grief support, but it gives you this picture about the character of God in a really unique way. And I'll explore the Hebrew language for this. I have it memorized, or I had it memorized, especially when I was in seminary in Hebrew. And I went and really did a deep dive on this. I'll also be talking a little bit about the Book of Psalms by Robert Alter, who is an incredible Hebrew scholar, and wrote his own translation and his own notes about that. In the notes here, I actually have my own translation of this from the original Hebrew, and I'd like for you maybe to take a look at that, and I'll talk about that, and I'll compare the King James line by line with the Hebrew, and then my translation, and show that maybe, and I was well informed by Robert Alter as well, in that the Hebrew version of this has a more visceral, immediate feeling. A lot of times our English translations, and you've probably heard this from me before, sound a little bit distant and formal in ways that the original text doesn't have. So what I'd like to do is present that to you. My hope is that as you see that, then you begin to see, oh my goodness, this psalm deserves to be the most famous of David's psalms, and also is a complete package. It's only 6 verses long, and so we'll do that. So I'll get started by going line by line through this, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it supportive and relaxing to hear. Now, of course, it starts in the King James Version. You hear, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Very famous beginning. It actually starts with a little bit of an introduction, and in Hebrew, it's Mizmor la David, Adonai rohi lo echsar. And Mizmor la David means a song of David. And "The Lord is my shepherd, I will lack nothing." So this is a complete thing. This is an image of the Lord in being the shepherd, or the sustainer of the people. And that David, remember, before he became king, was a shepherd, and he roamed the hills of Judah and as a shepherd. So he knew what that bond was like between the shepherd and the sheep. And that's so much, especially the first half of Psalm 23, is all about this imagery of the sheep. Now, it's a fairly common thing about leaders, gods being shepherds in the ancient Near East, but because of David's personal experience being a shepherd, there's an intimacy and an immediacy for this. So the idea is that because the Lord is the shepherd, and remember, shepherd is a lowly person in ancient Israel. So this immediately brings the Lord to earth, and that is willing to individually care for the sheep. And every time we see that imagery in Scripture, and I will lack nothing, that means that the Lord is supportive of that. The very next line shows you why, and that it's not some I shall not want in the King James version is just another way of saying that, but because English has changed a little bit, it really, I will lack nothing. The Lord will supply my entire need. So the next line in verse 2 in King James Version is, He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. In Hebrew, this is Benot Deshe Yarbitzeni Alme Manuchot Yanachaleni. And you can kind of hear that there's that first half, which is to be in green fields, green pastures, and that second half of being beside still waters. Now, I translate it a little bit differently because there's a couple of things in the Hebrew that are really interesting. This word yarbitzeni, the verb, that's a verb, and the verb there is not a verb that you use for people or for anything other than animals. This yarbitzeni means to lie with the stomach on the ground, something that only animals do, pasture animals do. So I translate it as, He causes me to sprawl on fresh grass. And this is very meaningful for people in the ancient Near East, because if you live in Southern California or Arizona or in a place like that, then you'll know what this feels like a little bit more than, say, other parts of the country or parts of the world. Is that when you live in these sort of really dry, deserty type climates, when the new rains come, the seeds have been lying dormant in the ground, and the fresh sprouts of grass come up. So, say in Southern California, for example, when the rains come, the brown chaparral on the hills all of a sudden turn green, and everything turns green. And so for a sheep, this is like heaven to them, because it's food and it's sustenance. Then the second half of the verse I translate as, He leads me to waters of calm. So it's not so much that the waters are still. You can look at it that way. It's more that the waters are drinkable and available. The sheep don't. It's like a stock pond feeling to them. And again, if you're in that environment where it's usually dry in the desert, this is an image of great peace. And you can imagine a shepherd leading his sheep through the hills to search for sustenance. And that's what this line is. So this is the way that the Lord, being the shepherd, and I will lack nothing, meaning me as a sheep, is being led into something that is kind of a vision of heaven. This sprawl, a joyful image of me sprawling with my stomach on the ground, rolling in fresh grass that just popped up, and it's delicious grass, just popped up because of desert rains coming, and that there's abundant water, and I'm not going to die of thirst. So there's this incredible joy built into this. The next line, verse 3, is, He restoreth my soul, He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Now, this contains also two very interesting things, and you can see this throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, is that there's always this kind of parallelism, they call it. And there's many different kinds of parallelism, but this idea of you have one thing and then another, and they're compared, they're either contrasted or they add to each other. And in this case, whereas the fresh grass and the waters of calm is one added to the other, you can see that this is also additive in a way. It's not contrasting for sure, but it's this idea that He restores my soul. Now this is nafshi yeshivev yankeni vamagele tzedek lama'an shamo in Hebrew. Nafshi yeshivev. This is this idea of not so much my soul, because nafshi is more about my life, my sustenance, who I am. So it's not just some sort of distant thing or a feeling. No, it's much more realistic. It's about protecting me. That the shepherd, the Lord, is going to save my life, going to give me food, going to protect me, and then He guides me on the right paths on account of His name. Now, this has a dual meaning here, and it had a dual meaning in Hebrew. It's a little bit more difficult to find the dual meaning in the King James, but in my account here, He guides me on the right paths. So not necessarily righteousness, which means has a moral component to it when we think of it, but it's more like it has a very physical thing in that sheep are following paths through the hills, and the shepherd's leading the sheep on these sheep paths to find food, to get to safety. So that's one meaning, the very physical meaning, but also the beginning of this sort of a change right here is that this idea is that the metaphor works for people too, and that lead me not only on paths to find food and to have my life saved, but also paths of righteousness, paths of goodness, and helping me to do the right thing. And then a very interesting thing, and you see this a lot in the Hebrew Bible, on account of His name. So that means He's doing, it's not just giving, but it's for both, is that the Lord receives a benefit when the Lord's sheep, just like the shepherd, when the sheep are happy, when the sheep feel safe, when the sheep are well fed, then there's a benefit to the shepherd, because they're having a healthy flock, for milk and meat and all of the things and for wool that you get from sheep. But in the same way, the metaphor works for here is that God's not only doing this, God or the Lord is not only doing this just to protect the people, but that God, for the sake of God's name, receives the benefit as well. And He does it. He does it for Himself. So there's this give and take, which is part of any loving relationship, right? It's not always it's not one way. It's two way, and it's more of a relationship than just a lord over God just doing it for the sheep. Then so you can see that these first three verses, it would be hard to say that this is grief support in these first three verses, because it's just providing goodness and that the shepherd is there to support and everything. But this is where the next line, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And this is where it has been used. So even if I walk through the shadow of death, the valley of the shadow of death, this is Gam ki alech bege tzalmavet lo exar, lo ira, ra, ata, imadi, shivtaka, umishandaka, hema, yana kamuni. So the first part of it here is, even though I walk through ravines of deep darkness. This is something that Robert Alter talks quite a bit, is yes, the valley of shadow of death does express it, and it's very poetically beautiful from the King James, and it invokes this idea of no matter what happens to me, even if death comes, then I am supported. And there's certainly part of that. But in the Hebrew, again, the image of being led through the ravines, and this would be, or through the valleys, and this would be in Judah. Judah is very mountainous. It has lots of ravines in the desert. The context here is that David, as shepherd, was also, these ravines are also places of great danger. For things like wild animals, for those kinds of things. But also, in David's case, he was hiding in the ravines around Jerusalem from the Philistine raiders, from his enemies when King Saul was after him. So when David is singing this psalm, it could have been when things were very insecure, and he's hiding in the mountains, he's hiding in the valleys, and that so these are valleys of death, because if he's discovered, then he will die, whether it's from the Philistines from the coast who were raiding, or whether it was from his enemy Saul, who was trying to find him. He would die. But the metaphor for the sheep is that the shepherd takes care of the sheep as they're making their way through these valleys from predators, from wolves and other predators. So that, because the shepherd is doing that, I will not fear danger. So it says, I fear no evil. Actually, what it means in Hebrew is, I will not fear danger, because you are there with me. Your club and your shepherd crook. So this is the shivtaka umishandaka. This is your club, and the club was used to both as a weapon against predators, could have been used to keep sheep in line, but then the crook, the shepherd's crook, the staff, is used to guide the sheep. And so these things that you could, especially the club being, you could think of as a violent image, but because that club is available, and there's some great pictures from the period, like carved into stone, and so it shows shepherds with a club that hangs from their belt, and that club was used both to discipline and move the sheep, keep the sheep on track, but mostly it was used for predators and for others. And then, of course, the shepherd's hook, which is the staff, and that's very obvious how you would use that to both maybe as a weapon, but mostly as a guidance, a tool for guiding. And it's interesting how these tools then are the thing that gives comfort. So it's not just the presence of the Lord or the presence of the shepherd, but it's how the shepherd acts among the sheep that brings comfort. So at this point, we've gone through these verses, and at this point, the metaphor changes dramatically. And because we've moved from the image of the people being sheep with a shepherd that is protecting, kind, gentle, and loving, to another image which is very different. And in King James, it's, "Thou preparest the table for me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over." And this is, you can see all of a sudden the Lord is preparing a table before me as an honored guest. That's very different than being a sheep, isn't it? Um, the metaphor changes to, and this is why we know that David was thinking about being in the valleys and being protected from his enemies, because not only is the Lord provide protection in the valleys, the valley of the shadow of death, but also provides a lavish feast, prepares a table, and that the table is not just a table of a feast, but also kind of shows the enemies that that David is favored, that David is the one who the Lord is taking care of in the presence of the enemies. So even though and you can also think of it around, even though enemies are around, the Lord still celebrates the Lord's guest. So that's what this is. This is guest. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. So in the ancient Near East, that means putting oil on the head was a way that you greeted an honored guest. Is you put olive oil on them, and and that was a way of greeting and abundance, showing abundance. And my cup runneth over, is my wine glass is always full. Ta'arech lefanai shulchan neged tzorerai vashemen roshi kosi revaya. And roshi kosi means my head, and the oil on my head. So in my translation, I try to be a little more explicit about this. I said, you prepare a lavish meal for me in front of my enemies. You honor me with oil on my head. My wine cup is always full. Now, the image here is also, think of being in the desert. Think of being in the Near East with tents and wandering with the sheep around. Well, what do you think of? You think of maybe like the you think of these meals that where you have all these little dishes. So what they would do is they would spread out a goat skin, and an honored guest would get all these little dishes of delicacies put before them. And of course, then the anointing, and then the wine cup. So this guest is being taken care of. And the Lord is doing that for David in this, and by extension, us as well. And then the last verse comes, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Achtov v'chesed yerdafuni kol yamei haya v'havti bevet Adonai. Let's see, what is that? Larech yamim. So a couple things here. Adonai means Lord in Hebrew. There's a parallelism here, because the first one, the Lord is my shepherd, and here it says, in the house of the Lord forever. These are the two places where the Lord is explicitly mentioned, the first verse and the last verse, the first phrase and the last phrase. There's a little bit of a difference here. There are a couple problems in just saying that the Lord forever. That is not what is said here, because it's more temporal. It's more about where we are. So this is how I translate. I say, surely goodness and loyal love. That's chesed love. If you ever hear that word, chesed, this loyal love, this deep love. It's not just a mercy. Mercy sounds too distant. It's surely goodness and loyal love will pursue me. The verb is to be pursued, grabbed, not just not followed, but pursued all my days. And then here's the important part. I will stay in the Lord's house all of my life. So the Lord will never abandon me. The Lord, it's not, even if I walk away, the Lord's still going to pursue me. No matter what happens, the Lord will provide goodness and loyal love. And the loyalty goes both ways. The loyalty of the sheep to the shepherd, the loyalty of David to the Lord, but also that the Lord will protect and be loyal to David as well. You see this quite a bit in Hebrew and throughout the Hebrew scriptures, is that it's not, again, in our English translations, we kind of see it as a one-way thing. You know, God's sitting on a mountain and directing things, and you really don't have that in the Hebrew Bible when you look at it very closely. This is something that I just find very comforting. Whenever I do a funeral, I've done dozens of them using these verses because people want them. And like I said, it's not explicitly about grief and lament, but there's an element of that. But it's kind of a balance. It's more about protection and support and presence of God. And that's certainly important. As when you grieve, you are in a holy state. When you read these words and you go through the Psalms in a deep way like this, you can kind of rise above it. You can be in this state. I like to think of it as that when you're in that holy state, in your meditative state, you know how when kind of the sounds of what's going on around you and all the hustle and bustle around you go away. And in this psalm, you really can get that feeling. You're safe. You're even in the wilderness. You're safe because the shepherd's there. And that you can look forward to goodness. You can look forward to the love of the Lord because you're an honored guest. You matter. Just like the sheep matter. Just like David mattered. And that's one of the ways that you can go through times of grief, because something horrible, something terrible has happened. Something, you miss the person that you love so much. But God's presence is still there, and you know you can count on God to support you. And that's why people love Psalm 23 so much. Like I said, I'll follow up talking a little bit more about grief. There's a little bit of a war on grief going on and lament, and it's good to put that away. It's okay. One thing I tell parishioners all the time, people, I say it from the pulpit, I say that when I'm in one-to-one with them, I say that at funerals and things like that. Grief doesn't go away. The deeper the love you had for the person that died, the longer, the deeper the grief will be, because that's what grief is. Grief is love. If you don't have grief, if you're not allowed to grieve, if you are being told that you get over it, you're being told to stop loving as much. And that's not what this is about. No, instead, it's about presence. It's about God being a shepherd and a generous host, and that you matter. People say lots of things about the Bible that aren't really there. And what we really should get from the Bible is this intimacy and closeness from God. And with that, I say, God bless you and take care.